Welcome everybody to tonight's webinar, Responding to Mental Health Crisis. My name's Rosie Barbara. I'm Youth Counsellor at Wyndham City Youth Services, and I work directly with young people and their families. Just a couple of things as we wait for more people to join. We have a couple of moderators in the background. We've got Tanya and Elise, who will be answering any questions you may have tonight throughout the evening. Feel free to ask questions. Anthony will be presenting, but at the end we'll also allow some time to answer some of those questions as well, if we feel appropriate. And I think that's about it as we wait for a couple of more seconds for more people to join. I hope everyone's had a great day and enjoyed the sun today. I don't think we're going to get great weather in the next few days. So, okay, let me introduce Anthony, who is our youth counsellor at Youth Services as well. He'll be presenting topic this evening, and he's ready to go. So I'll just get him on now. Go for it, Ant. I'm about to pop you on. There you go. You're live.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Rosie. I'm just going to load up the slides that we'll be going through for today.
Yeah.
Have those ones come up, Rosie?
I'll just get it ready. Now I'm going to send it live and then, yep, they come up.
Beautiful. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight. This is our third and final webinar in a three-part series. So you might be joining us for the first time tonight, or you might have seen some of our earlier webinars that we have presented. So we started off with a communication skills webinar focusing on parents and carers connecting with their teens. We then did a webinar on responding to mental health problems, which sort of provided a little bit of the scaffolding and background into tonight's webinar. And of course, tonight we're going to be talking about responding to mental health crisis. So if you are interested in either of the other workshops that we've recently done, we do have recording links that we'll be able to send you in the chat along the way for tonight, so that you're able to go back and rewatch any of those if you would like to. Just like to start with an acknowledgement of country and to acknowledge the traditional custodians on which Wyndham Council sits and on which some of us will be joining tonight. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, traditions, culture, knowledge and the hopes of Aboriginal Australia. We must remember that beneath Wyndham City Council, the land is, was and always will be Aboriginal land. Just to start us off for today, I do have this slide here just to really remind everybody about all of the different supports that are available. If you have joined tonight, I just want to start off by saying good on you, because we are going to be talking about some really tough things tonight. And whenever we are talking about tough things, it is possible that there are going to be different things that can come up for us, some uncomfortable memories, experience, emotions that might mean that we could or would like to access a mental health service to assist us to work through how it is that we're feeling. And so we have a couple crisis support services listed here, which I'm sure many of you would be familiar with. We have Kids Helpline for young people, Lifeline for adults, and we also have emergency support services there if there is a crisis needing emergency services. I would like to let you know that myself and Rosie, we make up the counselling team at Wyndham City Council, and you can contact us on this email address that's listed here. Now, it is important that you know that Rosie and I are not a crisis service. And what I mean by that is that crisis services are really good at responding in the moment to really high risk situations that are going on. And so usually usually a crisis service is a service that's able to respond immediately in that moment. And because Rosie and I can sometimes take up to 48 hours, to respond to someone who sends us an email. It's important that you know that if a crisis was to occur, we would not be the first people that you contact for support, just because we may not actually be able to get back to you in a timely enough manner to get you the support that you need. So if there is an urgent crisis that presents, and tonight we will be focusing on what actually is a crisis, but should an urgent crisis present itself, we would recommend one of the above lines here, as well as some of the other ones that we'll discuss shortly. However, if you are looking for some generalist counselling or some support for your mental health, you can make a referral to us on the web link here as well. So please feel free to get in touch with us if you feel like you are needing support. But of course, if it is a crisis that's presenting, make sure that you're contacting one of the services we discussed tonight, because they'll be able to provide you that immediate response. So particularly for people who joined us in our last session, What is a Mental Health Problem? We did talk about how a mental health problem is when there are altered thoughts, feelings or behaviours that are there longer than what they should be and are causing changes to day-to-day functioning. Now, of course, tonight, we are going to be focusing on mental health crisis. But it is important to understand, the reason I mention mental health problems is because it is important to understand the difference between them. So with regard to the criteria that we've got here, if somebody meets this criteria, that there's been an alteration in their functioning for longer than there should be, we would possibly consider that that person has a mental health problem, and we would probably encourage them to get some mental health support around that. That situation is quite different from a mental health crisis, which is defined as a situation in which urgent support is required because an individual is at risk to themselves or to somebody else. So what we're really going to be focusing on tonight is mental health crisis. So when there is that urgent support required because of risk to self or to somebody else. And in actual fact, tonight we're going to focus much more on when people are at risk to themselves, which would really come under the umbrella of suicide and self-harm. So when we're talking about mental health crisis, two of the most common mental health crises that can occur and that people often tell us they want some support with in terms of knowing how to respond is having thoughts or plans of suicide, and having thoughts or engaging in self-injury behaviour. Now, what's really important is that if either of these are occurring, we would take action immediately to put supports in place for that person, even if they asked us not to. So we're going to unpack that a little bit more shortly, but just to start off, it's really important that we're equipped with some really good language skills to talk about suicide and self-harm in society around us. And there are some do's and then there are also some don'ts. often, we know that suicide and self-harm do not get discussed openly enough. And, one of the reasons that can contribute to that is sometimes people don't know how to talk about it. They're not quite sure they've got the language for it. And they're not, particularly if they notice somebody who they think could be at risk, they often find that they're not sure what words to say, how to phrase things, and how to do that approach. So in terms of our language around suicide and self-harm, one of the big do's, so one of the things we do is we do say that somebody has died by suicide. Now, that's very different to how many of us talk about suicide, which is we may say someone committed suicide. Now, that language we really try to move away from, because in fact, it is not a crime to have a mental health problem, and suicide is not a criminal act. Now, we don't want to stigmatise people further by using this language of committed. And so looking at suicide as a cause of death is much, much more helpful for a number of reasons than saying committed. So really focusing on modifying our language and saying that someone died by suicide rather than committed suicide. We don't say attention seeking. So, we really try to avoid that language, that self-harm or suicide is just to seek attention. It is true that sometimes people will engage in these behaviours as a way of communicating a need that they have. If they, don't have a better way of communicating how much pain or distress they're in, they may not have the words, they may not have the level of understanding, they may not have the awareness, they may not simply have the people around that will listen. We really try to stay away from this idea of attention seeking, because if we label someone as attention seeking for letting us know in however it is that they do that they are struggling a lot with their mental health, if we tell someone who is struggling that they are attention seeking, or we label them that way, what we're actually discouraging them from talking to us or showing us in whatever way they can that they're not doing well. And how they might show us might be from, posting a status on a social media platform. They might find that actually less confrontational, less difficult than having a one-to-one, face-to-face conversation with somebody. So, we really try to stay away from this language of attention seeking and think much more about, if that ever does pop up for you, that you think, oh, that seems like attention seeking, I really want you to flip that language and go, gee, I wonder what need they're trying to communicate right now. And of course, if I saw somebody write something on social media, if I was to take that lens of, I wonder what need they're communicating, I'd be thinking to myself, gee, I wonder what's going on for them, or what's currently getting in the way of them talking to somebody in their life about that. Do they have someone in their life to talk to about that? Has it been okay for them in the past to talk openly about how they feel, or do they get told, no, just get over it, don't worry about it? There's lots of different things we can think about there. And lastly, in terms of our language around suicide, we don't say that somebody completed suicide. Now, completed, when we think about the word completed, it has almost like a positive connotation to it, really. If I complete a task, that's a good thing. If I have an incomplete task, which, does happen to me every so often, that's actually, the connotation we have to that would be that that's a bad thing. So, we don't really, in my book, and I imagine in everyone's book here, if somebody, for whatever reason, does not go through with a suicide attempt, we wouldn't want to say, oh, that was incomplete. We would really not want to have any of those positive language connotations associated with it. So, rather than saying completed suicide, we would instead, I'll just draw you back to the slide before. We would instead say died by suicide. So just some pointers around language there. This is something that we spoke a little bit about for those of you that attended the mental health problems workshop. But again, defining our roles when we see a mental health crisis unfolding, I cannot stress enough how important this is. Asking ourselves, what is my role? What is my job here? And that can often inform us in terms of deciding what's the best action to take here. I've got some questions here that are probably worth writing down for those of you who are taking notes. What is my role right now? What service am I able to provide right now? And what are the constraints on me right now? So, for example, if I think about myself as an individual, the mental health crisis support I would offer somebody in a work situation, if I get the sense that a colleague of mine, is not doing well and is at risk to themselves, the crisis support that I would offer that person would be very different to somebody who I saw on the street when there is nobody else around. Maybe I've got some questions about how safe it would be for me to approach this stranger. Again, if we think another layer on that, if I was walking down the street and saw somebody in what appeared to be a crisis and had, very young children with me, that might also impact on what I might do. So perhaps rather than going over and maybe having a conversation, trying to approach the person, which I might do in other situations, if I had young children with me, maybe I would simply call emergency services and leave it at that. In fact, a lot of other people may not even want to approach somebody because they may not feel safe or might just feel like it's not really their place to do that. So, what we would say is we always look at taking some action, and maybe that action is simply calling emergency services and leaving if that's what feels most safe given your role at the time. But I hope that from these questions, you might be able to pick up that depending on where you are, who you are with, what your role is, what else is going on, it may you may respond completely different in one mental health crisis to another. So this is going to be very, very important to think about. In terms of our, 3-step plan, this is a little bit different to the one that we went through for mental health problems. So, we are still going to notice and acknowledge the signs of a mental health crisis in this case. We're going to still listen, validate and show support to the person. But instead of encouraging the person to engage with supports, we're going to link the person in with supports, or at least take action to try and get that happening. Now, of course, that person could refuse supports. That person could make it very, 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 very difficult for you to get those supports in place successfully. And that's okay. It is not your job to save somebody in a mental health crisis. But what you can often do is take action to enlist a service who may be able to step in and do that work for you. Now, what you're going to see here is that on the left, I've got a little bit of an arrow which says continue only if you are safe to do so. Now, my thinking around that is really just that example I gave you, of somebody on the street, maybe there's nobody else around, that kind of situation. You might notice some signs that might indicate to you that somebody is in a mental health crisis, but you might not actually feel safe to do anything. Now, just like physical first aid, responding to a physical health problem that we might come across, if we are not safe to approach, to support, to physically respond, we would not do that. So that is a really important thing for us to be considering constantly. Am I safe to go to the next step? Am I safe to keep going? And if at any point the answer is no, there is absolutely nothing wrong with safely leaving the situation that you're in and calling the police to respond when they're able to. I can think of a particular situation. It was, I just moved into my apartment and I'd gone for a run at night, and it was, I think it was actually like the first night I was in my apartment, and I came across, I saw a young woman who was, talking a lot to herself, and it was very obvious that she was not doing well mentally, and looked intoxicated, looked under the influence of a substance, if not multiple, and it didn't really seem like she would be able to keep herself safe in any way in terms of walking onto oncoming traffic or different things like that. I noticed that, and didn't feel unsafe, particularly because she had very little awareness of anything or anyone around her. So, when I was standing at quite a distance, she wouldn't have even been aware that I was there. And called the police, and they said, "Yep, great. Look, thank you so much for letting us know." And I'd said to them, "Oh, do you know roughly how long it might be for someone to get out there?" And they said, "Oh, look, understandably, they would have been very, very busy." This was also a few years ago. They would have been very, very busy at the time, and said, "Look, we're hoping we can get someone out there within 90 minutes. Now, that then kind of brought up a question for me to go, okay, so should I hang around here? Have I done my bit, and should I go? Should I hang around and, whatnot? And I really got thinking about what was my role. What did I feel like I was able to do, in that moment? Sort of considered the situation, didn't feel unsafe, particularly because, I suppose it was apparent she was really struggling to even hold herself up. So I didn't really feel like there was any physical threat to me, particularly keeping a distance. And so, I did decide to hang around for a while longer, but it would have been very acceptable and very okay for me to have left at that point. So calling emergency services, knowing that there's, thinking that there's a crisis there, is enough, and you can go. And in fact, the police officer said that to me. He said, if you'd like to stay, you're welcome to, but just know you do not have to do anything further beyond that. You have taken the action required to do your bit to try and help that person to stay safe. But of course, the only person that can keep that person safe is, often themselves. So you've done your bit, and if you needed to go, you're welcome to. So I just make that point to let people know that safety is always at the forefront. There is, if we think about in mental health crisis, we're trying to keep other people safe. It's really counterintuitive to be putting ourselves at risk trying to keep someone else safe. So just be mindful that if you were ever not feeling safe, and can I also say about that, perception of safe is your own. If you are not feeling safe, it doesn't matter if Joe down the street feels safe in that situation. It doesn't matter if Rosie feels safe in that situation. What matters is how safe you yourself feel. And if you feel safe, absolutely, you're welcome to continue on supporting that person as best you can. If you do not feel safe, you need to leave the situation and put everything you can in place to make sure that you yourself are safe. So in terms of noticing the signs, there are, I suppose one thing to say is that there is no, there is no sure thing whether a person is having thoughts of ending their life, is self-harming. There's actually no way to know that for sure. And so, here we've got a list of things that may indicate that somebody may be experience or at risk of a mental health crisis, including, expressing a desire to hurt or kill themselves, kind of reporting that they don't really have a sense of purpose or no reason for living. Hopelessness is often a really, really big one as well. I think another thing, particularly for young males or even older males, engaging in risky activities. It can sort of link in with this lack of care for self, which can often put someone at heightened risk. So I do want to really make clear the point that we can never really know if somebody is experiencing suicidal thinking or anything like that unless we ask them. But here are some things that if you did start noticing some of these things, that it would be good to start a conversation about it. Look, one that's not really here, and I've sort of focused much more here on, I guess, more psychological and behavioural signs. But I think that this pandemic that we're in has really got me thinking about many more social signs. So that could be things like job loss. That could be things like family separation or breakdown. That could be things like isolation and a sense of disconnectedness. I think it's very important to think about, and there was one other one. Yeah, I think also financial stress and pressure is another one that jumps out at me. So, this list is by no means exhaustive. It does not mean that if somebody has had a family separation that they are, having thoughts of ending their life. It certainly does not mean that. But really what I want you to think about is, could any of these different societal changes and things get somebody feeling as though, their sense of purpose in life is gone or has been altered? Could it get someone, feeling a bit trapped, feeling a bit hopeless about things, for example? And, we had Are You OK Day recently, and I guess, particularly the people that we know in our lives where these things are going on, it would be a very good idea to check in with them. So in terms of our approach, for those of you who were in our mental health problems webinar, and of course those who weren't could go back and watch it if they chose to, we spoke about some of the things we might consider when deciding how and when to approach someone. Might be, are there other people around, because that could be a bit shaming if there's other people around and we try to open up a conversation about mental health. What setting are we in? So if we're in the open plan office at work, am I going to call out across the office to Rosie and say, "Hi Rosie, how are you going? I'm wondering, I've noticed a few things," that certainly wouldn't be appropriate. So kind of thinking about some of these things here. However, what's really important to know is that in a crisis, we need to act immediately, irrespective of the circumstances. So if the person is at immediate risk, we need to act immediately, even though it may not be the ideal way to respond and to act. It may just be that we need to pull someone aside and say, "Hey, listen, I need to have a chat with you. I'm noticing this, and this, and I wanted to check in with you." So it could also be that if we just think that that person's unsafe, again, it could just be calling emergency services right then and there. That's one of the key differences between how we respond to mental health problems and how we respond to mental health crisis. Mental health crisis, we're taking immediate action because there is immediate risk. With mental health problems, there may not be an immediate risk present, so we may not need to take immediate action. And in those cases, as we spoke about in that webinar, we can kind of think a bit more about, well, what might be a better place, a better way, a better time to bring the topic of mental health up with this person. But for crisis, because there is immediate risk, we need immediate response. Of course, if we are able to engage in a conversation, with the person. You know, we want to observe, notice, listen, attend to their body language and what they're saying. You know, really mirror to show that we're connected with them and we're there with them in that moment. Consider body language, facial expressions, and language used when we are having these conversations. And I think particularly thinking about since obviously everything now, all of our communication or most of our communication is happening through a screen, we need to be a little bit more aware of how it is that we're looking, how it is that we're presenting ourselves, how it is that we're sounding, and you know, making sure that we are showing that person that we're there and we're present. Sharing simple observations better than probing always, you know, so you know, short, sharp, you know, that sounds really tough. You're looking a little more down than usual. You know, anything that you can just briefly pick up on to allow the person to tell you more about what's going on for them is going to be really useful. And we want to avoid why questions at first, because, you know, if you sort of said, oh, look, I'm not really feeling my best. I, you know, have been having some really dark thoughts lately, and someone says why, it can be a little bit difficult sometimes for that person to even answer, because perhaps they don't actually know why they're feeling that way. So, you know, we really want to avoid those why questions and just let the person to tell the story in their own words. And yeah, you know, sometimes when people are telling us about their mental health, they might be giving us examples or stories about different things that have been tricky for them or different situations that have happened. And, you know, it's really easy to sort of jump in and, you know, want to correct or go, oh, but, you know, on different things. But we really try to avoid that as much as possible. I guess I want to really talk here about assessing risk and you know, when we have gotten someone to the point where they're opening up and talking to us about what's going on, what are some of the things that we might think about? So I just want to give you, I guess, a bit of an overview around what are some of the different things that we're listening for, that if we hear, you know, we might have a bit of a better sense around how at risk they are, and what might help us to sort of keep that person safe. So when someone mentions to us that they're having some of these thoughts, I guess the first thing that I don't think I've put on one of these slides, but we want to ask directly, if we notice any of those signs, we want to make sure that we're asking directly the person, are you having thoughts of ending your life? You know, one way that I tend to do it is I say, you know, I obviously work a lot with young people, and I'll say, oh, a lot of young people that I talk to who are feeling really stressed out sometimes have thoughts of not wanting to be here anymore. Is that something that's ever come up for you? And, you know, something like that kind of phrasing, it's a really normalized statement. It's just saying actually a lot of people kind of you know, behave or respond or have this happen for them. What about yourself? And I think that, you know, if we think about anything in life, if we, you know, phrase things in that way, we're much more likely to get someone to open up and agree and say yes, and, you know, and tell us what might be going on. So once we've asked them directly, what I really want you to try and listen to is, are these thoughts of escape or are these thoughts of wanting to end their life? Now, you might ask a few questions back to elicit that, but thoughts of escape are often things around, I don't want to be here anymore. If I wasn't here, I wouldn't have to deal with all the things that are going on. I would be able to avoid all the stress going on in my life if I wasn't here anymore. So the thoughts about ending their life are really around trying to escape a stressful situation, person, place, thing, situation. And if that is the case, it tends to be lower risk than someone who's saying, I've had enough. I want to end my life. I don't want to exist anymore. I have no reason for being here. There's nothing keeping me here. There's nothing good in my life. Those those sorts of comments are a bit more explicit, a bit more focused on the actual wanting to die, and those ones we might be. I mean, we're going to be concerned about all of it, of course, but those ones we might be a little bit more concerned about. Now, just to unpack that a little bit more, one of the reasons why we may not be as concerned about thoughts of escape. So if I wasn't here, I wouldn't have to deal with this anymore. One of the reasons why that can sometimes be lower risk is because wanting to escape a stressful situation, thing, person, whatnot, sometimes we can actually put really effective strategies in place to assist the person with that. So if they're really stressed out about schoolwork and their workload, often, we can talk to the school about that, and minimise the amount of work that they're doing. Of course, if they're at risk. If it's about a particular problem, with friends or relationships or things like that, again, it is possible to get support for those friendships, relationships, and whatnot. To elicit some sort of change there. So that tends to be why it's a little bit easier, I suppose, for us to intervene and help out. And so what I really want you to listen for is that if you're getting some thoughts around escape coming up, you might start thinking, and you wouldn't verbalize it yet. You wouldn't come in. It's not yet about problem solving and trying to put things in place yet. But you might start thinking about, okay, are there certain things that we can put in place in the short term just to take some of the pressure off? Yeah. So, if work has been a nightmare, maybe, okay, what if we just, call your boss and say you're not able to come in this week, that you're needing to take some time off, for example. In some situations that might be beneficial. So, we might start thinking about that, but we're not going to jump in and problem solve just yet, because we're still trying to get a risk profile, a picture of how risky this is. We would then also want to know, so one of the biggest predictors of future attempts at ending a person's life is often if there have, how many prior attempts there have been. So we often want to know that if someone has had prior attempts of ending their life, that automatically makes them higher risk of doing so again. And so what some of the things we might want to know here would be how many there were. So, was it once? Was it 2 or 3 times? Was it more than that? We'd also want to know how recent it was. Some clients that I work with, I'm thinking about adults that I work with though, or, not so much quite young people, but, they might say to me, when I ask them about prior attempts, they might say to me, yeah, look, I did probably about 5 to 6 years ago. But I'm in a bit of a different place now. So I was, particularly, feeling really bad about myself and my work and my job and, whatnot. But now I actually feel like I'm in a bit of a different place. I'm in a relationship that I really like and, sort of stuff like that. So, someone might tell us about prior attempts and we might want to find out, I guess in my experience, people, if they're not sort of feeling the same way, like that example I gave you, they'll often tell you that, I've found. So, they'll say, oh, look, yes, I have in the past, but, they'll go, but that was, blah, blah, blah. And they'll sort of give you some sort of story that tells you about the context that sat in. But you do want to know how recent they were. You also want to find out about them and how lethal they were. And what I mean by that is how risky and how likely were they to actually cause death. So an example of that might be, I have had, I'm trying to think of some examples. Of course, there are some causes of death that are much more likely to end somebody's life and are much more, I guess, much harder to reverse. So an example I might give is that if somebody was to overdose on medication, while that is a very, very risky thing to do, in some cases, a person, may have some time to change their mind and bring up the medication that they've ingested. They may be able to get their stomach pumped. It may not actually have the impact on them to kill them, which would be very different to some other forms of ending one's life where it's actually not reversible. So once something's put into motion, even if the person does change their mind, they're not going to be able to do anything differently in that moment. So we do want to find out how lethal they are, and of course, the more lethal, the higher risk we would say they are. The other thing that's important to ask about is, are there any plans about how they would go about doing it? And, obviously some people will say, no, look, I've not really thought about it, or I've not really, considered it. And other people will say, yes, actually, I have thought about how I would do it. And I guess the more detailed and specific the plan is, the higher the risk is. So, we want to find out if there is a plan and what the plan is. We also don't want to assume that there's only one. So sometimes people go, oh, have you had a plan about how you do it? And someone might talk to them a bit about that plan, but not think to go, okay, so did you have any other plans? And the reason we want to find out about this is because we want to do this last dot point here. We want to reduce access to means. And what we're really talking about there is, I think a good example of this might be something like I'm trying to think. So if maybe if somebody had a plan to overdose on medication, but all the medication in the home was locked up, and they weren't able to get it, that would reduce their access to the means of which they were trying to end their life, which is a really good way to help support and protect that person. So, but the reason why we ask about the plans people have is because we then, would be wanting to use our problem solving to try and deactivate it. So if somebody says, that they would do something with a knife, and the knife that they would get would be from the kitchen, we may consider then locking up kitchen knives and sharp objects. If it was something to do with medication, it might be that we then lock up the medication and make sure that people don't have easy access to that. That's one of the main reasons we ask about plans, because we want to see if there's things we can put in place to reduce the level of risk of them doing that. And it also gives us an understanding around when they might be most at risk. So is it alone when they're alone at night? Is it, during the day? Just thinking through all of those things. I suppose the last point here, or one of the last points, is really around linking the person in with supports. So for some people, we might find out that they maybe are harming themselves, maybe they are having thoughts of ending their life, but they may be able to keep themselves safe in the short term. So in situations like that, we may link them in with a GP to get a referral to a mental health professional. So the key would be here is that if they have told you what's going on and they feel like, they might be able to keep themselves safe in the short term, that might be a sign that we can link them in with a mental health professional to work through with them what's going on. In situations like this, we still should inform an emergency contact of the situation, what we've found out, what we've heard. That could be a parent or carer, that could be a partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, that could be a really close friend. Basically what we're looking at there is a responsible adult in the person's life who will be able to check in with them and really support them to access that GP to go to the mental health professional if that's the plan that we come up with. And I think, having said that though, there are going to definitely be times where the person, you don't actually feel confident the person's going to be able to keep themselves safe, and or they tell you that they don't think that they're able to keep themselves safe. So this is often one of the hardest type of mental health crises to respond to, and one of the ones that we're the type that we'll be most anxious about, but we do need to put something in place to keep them safe. So in situations like this, we would look at engaging a crisis support service. Now, there's a hyperlink here, and what you can actually do is you can go to this website, and it will tell you, basically you click on what age bracket, so, under 15, over 65, they've got each of the age brackets for Victoria. You click on it. You click on the relevant age bracket for the person that's needing support, and then you would click on the geographical area that they're from. I think for Wyndham, typically we are, I want to say southwest, but don't quote me on that. What I have done for Wyndham is I've put the numbers here. So for a young person under 15, it's the Royal Children's Hospital that deals with crisis support, and that's the phone number. You can get them on there, that 1800 number. For young people between 15 to 25, it's Origin Youth Health, and we've got the phone number for them there. And for adults over 25, for our area, it would be Werribee Mercy Mental Health, and we've got the phone number for them there. So of course, there may be people joining us who live in other regions and whatnot. So if you go to that website, or sometimes you might find yourself somewhere else in Victoria that is not what you're used to, and you can just go on that website, click on the age bracket, click on the location, and it'll tell you what the service is and for what age brackets. What if they don't want help? So, this is a really important point for us to talk about, because in situations of crisis, it may be that you need to act against the person's wishes in order to get them the help that they need. And one thing that we often talk about in this space is that keeping the person safe and alive is more important than whether they're going to be mad at you or not. So, one of our bosses, actually, G, who is also a counsellor, she really talks to us a lot about that. And she says, look, this person might be angry at you for, calling a crisis service when they're saying don't. But what's going to be harder for you to live with, them being mad at you or them dying? And that's a really powerful statement, I think, but often we feel really anxious when we're making these decisions, thinking, oh, well, I don't think they're safe. They don't seem to be safe. They're telling me they're not safe, maybe even, but they're saying, don't tell anyone, don't tell anyone, don't tell anyone. And that's often a really difficult decision for us to make. But I think, the thinking I go through in my head is, would I rather them be mad and alive, or, happy with me, but no longer here? I think that's a really important question to ask. One thing I think as well, I never promise to keep anything about someone's safety private, because if I need to act on it, I will. So if someone's saying to me, oh, look, I've got to tell you, something because, I want to tell you something, I've just not been feeling well, but before I do, you have to promise that you're not going to tell anyone. I always say, so look, if I'll be really honest with you, if I start to believe that, if I start to become concerned about your safety, I will need to talk to someone about it, because that will be what's needed in order to keep you safe. And I guess this last point is something that I'm a really big advocate for in a lot of the people I come into contact with, which is that for all of us attending tonight, I think it's really important that we talk to the people in our network around us, people in our community, and we give the people around us permission to take our safety seriously and act on our behalf if we end up experiencing a mental health crisis. So I've had this conversation with friends of mine and with family where I've said, I just want you to know, if you're ever in doubt, if you are ever concerned about my safety and my ability to keep myself safe, I give you permission to act on that and do what you need to do to keep myself safe, even if in the moment I'm not wanting you to do that. I'm telling you very clearly now, I give you permission to do that. And I think that that's something that's really, really important to think about in relation to, you know, not just doing a 1 hour webinar and going, okay, you know, we've got some extra skills. But moving forward, I do hope you've got some extra skills from this webinar, but I really want you all to move forward and have that conversation with someone to say, I give you permission to do this for me. Are you giving me permission for me to do that for you? Because, I mean, realistically, whether they do or don't, you're going to have to do it anyway. But I think it opens up these conversations where it takes out the grey area, because when people are doing, when people have their thinking brain online, when people are not in crisis, typically they would say, yeah, do you know what? If I'm not safe, I would want you to make sure I'm taken care of. And so, you know, really making sure that we are having those conversations with the people around us. We are just about to launch into question time. I guess I just did want to have this reminder. You know, we've spoken about some really heavy stuff, and, you know, we've kept it to an hour because, you know, we're mindful that a lot of people are spending all day on a screen, and then, you know, and then I'm sitting here asking you to spend another hour on a screen. And so because of, you know, that constraint of it being an hour, we're actually moving through a lot of this stuff really quickly, and, you know, sometimes not with the delicacy that it deserves. But I think it's really important just to know that if this presentation has raised anything for you that you're feeling a little bit unsettled about, either about yourself or about someone else, you know, reach out to one of these crisis services, get in touch, have the chat with somebody, and really, we really encourage you to, you know, pursue that support for yourself or for someone else. Of course, you know, if you think that you will, that you'd be interested, or you know someone who would be interested in youth counselling, generalist youth counselling with us, you're very welcome to make a referral to us or to get in touch and ask us more about that as well. I guess at this point I might stop sharing the slides because we are at question time. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if we've had any questions come through yet. Maybe
yeah, we have, Anthony. We've had quite a few. And you're happy for me to just read them so that perhaps you can add. I think there have been some answers, but perhaps you might want to elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah.
There's one here about can a person be sanctioned and how does this happen? So I'm assuming this is in relation to perhaps being admitted into hospital with without permission, or, you know, I guess I'm assuming. Would you say, Anthony?
Yeah. I think that's what that means, and maybe that person can let us know if it's not that. But yes, look, that can happen, and basically what happens is that when somebody does present to a crisis service, you know. I guess to sort of summarize it, there is a conversation and an assessment done as to whether this person is able to keep themselves safe or not. And if they're not, a medical professional may be able to put them on a mental health order, which means that even though they may not personally agree that, you know, what their care needs to look like, it basically gives the medical professionals decision-making ability around what sort of, you know, where that person stays and what sort of treatment that they might get access to, because that person is deemed as not being of fit mind in that state of crisis.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. The next question is, what about if the support services have long waiting lists? What could be the quickest way to get help?
Yeah, and that's such a great question. And I think that that is a very much a reality often. It would be of no surprise to anybody here that mental health services across the country are very, very much under-resourced, and that waits are often very, very high across the board. Typically, what we would say is, you're calling one of these numbers and you're waiting to get through to someone and trying to get someone out to support. I'm going to make the assumption with this statement that you're feeling safe in this situation, because, of course, if you weren't, you would make the phone call and you would go. Or more specifically, you would go and then you might make the phone call. So your safety is always the first action that you take. But I'll assume that in this situation that the person who's responding is feeling safe. If you can't get a response because a lot of these mental health services are just completely overstaffed, it's certainly not ideal, but often the best thing to do is to go straight to emergency at the hospital, and meet with someone there for an assessment. I think it's important to know that a lot of people that have been through hospital emergency services have sort of spoken about it being a really difficult experience when the problem was their mental health. So, maybe people, some of the clinicians they meet with may not be very, supportive or understanding of the mental health problem. And whatnot. Now, that's still the best way to move forward at present, and a lot's being done to sort of change that to make it a better experience for people. But I think it's just good to be aware that it's probably not going to be, just based on experiences I've heard, it's probably not going to be the best mental health support that's ever been provided, but it will be support right at that pointy end when it's needed.
Thanks, Anthony. There was a question earlier on about language, best language, and it was this question is about using the word attempted and attempted suicide, or particularly when someone has attempted and have failed. Is that still appropriate language to use?
Yeah. So look, I'm very open to there being, sort of better language, but I think attempted is okay. I've actually seen Elise's response here. Someone engaged in suicidal behaviour. I actually think that's probably much better. I really like that one that you've got there, Elise, because again, we're sort of describing the behaviour without really putting a good or a bad value judgment on it, so to speak. So, I think attempted is still sort of commonly used, and I think for the most part it's pretty okay. But I really like Elise's idea there around someone engaged in suicidal behaviour.
Yeah, I like both as well. I mean, I like Elise's, but I also, I understand it's readily used still in terms of the word attempted. So, I think that's okay. There's another one here, Anth, which you may have answered during the presentation. When in a situation where the family member keeps saying things like, I'm going to kill myself, or I just want to die, no one would care if I killed myself. What form of attention is acceptable at this point for these family members?
Yeah,
in terms of response. Yeah.
So I'm kind of hearing that it almost sounds like maybe there's a family member who's saying this very frequently and has perhaps not yet engaged in suicidal behaviour. And so there's a bit of a sense, I'm kind of reading between the lines, but it sounds like there's a bit of a sense there that, that maybe there is, I'm kind of seeing the word attention there, it sounds like a bit of a question, is there some attention seeking going on here? Is that a little bit of what we're seeing? And, the question I sort of ask myself would be, what need are they communicating? So what is it do we think that they're needing at that point in time? And I think the other thing I think about when somebody is saying these things on a regular basis is I go, gee, I wonder what's happened in this person's life that, look, if they are doing that to sort of, get people to acknowledge and see them. I wonder, what's happened in that person's life where they feel that that's the level that they need to go to in order to feel seen, in order to feel heard and understood. And it's I guess I'd be really interested to find out a little bit more about how heard that person feels, and I wonder, I guess. What form of attention is acceptable? I mean, I think always, if someone says they're going to kill themselves, we always take it seriously, always. And I know that can be a bit tricky sometimes when we have, maybe people that have made the comments several times over. But we need to take it seriously, and we need to, sort of inquire about, are they able to keep themselves safe? What are the thoughts about? Is it more the escape stuff? Is it more, intent to die? I want to know if they had plans. All that sort of stuff we went through. I'd want to find out about that too.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it's really just looking again at what you presented around the risk and the level of risk, the plan, if there's a plan. It's just about being curious as to what might be going on and investigating further. And perhaps it is about linking them in with definitely linking them into some mental health support. Definitely. I hope that was adequate response in terms of your questioning there. Anyone else have any other questions that they'd like to ask? Please, now is a chance. We have gone a little bit over time, but we're still here if there's any final questions before we finish off. No, looks like that's it. Yeah, that's it. So yes.
Sorry, hold on. We do have another one coming.
Okay, cool.
Oh no, we've just got a response to that saying thank you. Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to post it.
No,
yes, no worries.
Tanya, we wouldn't have wanted to miss someone at the last minute.
Yes.
I also wanted to say, I haven't posted in the chat, but could we just let everyone know about this session being recorded?
Yes, perfect. Yes. Thank you, Tanya. So this session, as Tanya said, is also being recorded, and our hope would be that it's going to get uploaded onto our website. I think the turnaround is roughly about a week of the full recording. Yes. And so once it is up, we email out attendees to say, hey guys, it's up. And you're welcome to go back and watch through it again. But also a lot of parents tell us that they know other people in their world that might benefit from some of the presentations we've done, and we'll often share that with them. So that's also completely fine as well.
Great. All right. Well, thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Anthony, for a fantastic presentation. That was great. Yes, we hope you enjoyed it. We will send out some emails and surveys. Just please provide feedback and any suggestions. We'd love to hear from you. And again, as mentioned, it's recorded, so you can look for this link and share with others as well on the Wyndham Together website, and you'll get that information in the email as well. Awesome. I think that's it for the evening. Thanks again, everybody. We hope you have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.